There are many different type of people out there. I fall into the category of young earth creationist, which, surprisingly, believe it or not, is the majority. And we are catastrophists. That is what we believe in. The secular version follows uniformitarianism. That's what you learned in school. That's what we were all taught. That's what we were all led to believe. So the differences are how we view the past. That said, when it comes to dating the age of the Earth, there is only one tool for that. That's radiometric dating. When you want to know the age of deep ice cores, radiometric dating. Want to know the age of the moon? Radiometric dating. Want to know the age of meteors? Radiometric dating. You get the point. Until now, these dates have not favored young Earth creation. As a matter of fact, both heat problems from both of the two most popular young Earth creation flood models exist trying to deal with radiometric dates. Real quick, I want to give you an explanation of what radiometric dating actually is, since this debate will be centered around that topic. Basically, we have a parent radioactive element that slowly decays over time into a new daughter element. This happens from uranium all the way down to lead, which is a stable element that can no longer decay. The half-life for such radioactive elements like uranium and thorium are very large, meaning it takes a lot of time for them to decay into their daughter isotopes. So what happens is we look in nature, then extrapolate back in time to how much it must have been to take that amount of time to create that amount of daughter element. It's a pretty logical and straightforward question, right? Well, yes and no. Basically, there are 8 major assumptions that actually go into this, and until recently, none of them could be proven. It is because of these assumptions we have statements like these, which we will not go over right now because of time, but as you can see, the problems abound based on starting assumptions. Now, don't forget, I like radiometric dating. I think as a tool, it is one of the best ways we can measure something in the past and in the future. With that said, we're going to focus on the second problem today. First, we go over to the Proton 21 laboratories in Ukraine. Unfortunately, this is a horrible part of the world right now, and the laboratory is in the midst of this. But they are working, nonetheless, on cold fusion. One of the scientists that now works for the Proton 21 laboratories, before this, he got the first results ever for iron formation. These results showed us something amazing, that they formed in the exact ratio of the iron that we have on Earth today. This scientist later went on and joined the Proton 21 laboratories, and they went on to create all of the different radioactive elements and stable elements that exist on Earth today, including high amounts of the daughter elements that they formed in high ratios, as you can see here. And this got the scientist into thinking, how can we utilize the high amounts of these daughter elements that form? Then they came up with a plan, and it was to produce high concentrations, more than normal, of only certain radioactive elements. The company's primary production of radioactive isotopes came in Tactinium-99, Iodine-131, and Lutetium-177, which are used for medical imaging for cancer treatments. This got me thinking, what ratios were radioactive elements actually formed in this laboratory experiment? Because if the non-radioactive elements were forming in the exact same ratios as on Earth today, what are the odds that the radioactive elements were forming in this same ratio? So we go first to aluminum-26, which is a short-lived isotope with a half-life of only 730,000 years. So what's it doing here in such high amounts? Not just in the Milky Way galaxy, but Earth itself. To try to resolve this paradox, scientists first thought that maybe it was formed via a cosmic rays from the sun. But the problem is, the sun couldn't make the cosmic rays required. So then they had to resort to the idea that maybe there was a burst of aluminum-26 production that came from a nearby supernova. But that is a rescue device because supernovas cannot create aluminum-26 or any element over iron for that matter. So they can invoke these rescue devices all they want. But the fact is, we observed the formation of aluminum in the lab, as it is today on Earth, and this evidence resolves the paradox problem. But it also reduces the age of the Earth to an upper limit of 740,000 years. But that's not all. Next, we have potassium formation. If the ratio is also the same today, then the Earth cannot be older than 1.25 billion years old. And lo and behold, that is exactly what we find. We do not find high amounts of parent isotopes with low amounts of daughter isotopes that would have existed even billions of years ago, let alone 4.56 billion years ago. This brings us to the next piece of evidence that confirms all of this, which is known as the lead paradox. We have way more radiogenic lead daughter isotopes than there should be unless the Earth formed 13.9 billion years ago. That's just 100 million years after the formation of the universe itself. Obviously, this is a huge problem that can only be resolved through either accelerated nuclear decay or by the observational formation of these elements. The new discoveries make this paradox even worse for the evolutionary proponents because they needed the core to be full of non-radiogenic lead to balance out the ratio. Yet, the new discovery shows that there is not much lead as expected, and they needed to find a lot more, not less. And it was also radiogenic, the exact opposite of what was required to solve this paradox. I believe this new evidence also explains why the distribution of radioactive elements exists as they do today, which makes no sense evolutionarily. Over 50% of all radioactive elements of uranium and thorium are in Australia alone, and Australia has over 90% of all radioactive uranium and thorium on the crust of the Earth, not deep within the Earth as it should have been over billions of years. Next, I want to go over an analogy with you. Last week, I made these clocks, but they all tick at different rates. And these clocks even have different clocks inside of them. The evolutionary side had always thought that radioactive elements formed like this. But what we actually discovered is that they formed the exact opposite way. You see, at first glance, if we just found these clocks in the ground and they ticked at a constant rate, we would assume that we can just reverse the clocks and they can tell us time going backwards in history. While true for the most part, the most important question of all still needs to be asked before just agreeing with this basic idea. What happens if going backwards we run out of history, yet the clocks are still able to give us a date? For example, as I said, I made these clocks last week, and they do tell time perfectly. So I have placed these into a computer game at the very start, at the dawn of time in the program, and all the NPCs are using them as clocks. So they came up with the idea that they can also use them to date history, but they have no idea when I made them unless they read the manual that I gave them on when I made the game. The Bible is that manual, and this is why we use it to tell us how old the Earth is, and not start out with the assumptions and presume we already have the answers. The same analogy applies today. We think because they tell accurate time that they must be able to tell us accurate history. Yet, if you are using them to tell time about history that does not exist, then we have a problem. And that is exactly what has happened today, based on a made-up recent concept of evolution. So that takes us back to this image. Which out of these clocks can I actually use to tell time? Well, all of them tell time accurately. But as I said, I only created them last week. So even though they all have the capacity to tell time, even going backwards, we cannot use them to tell a time about when they formed, unless we know some very important factors. So when these elements formed, what was the parent to daughter isotope ratios at that time? That is the golden question, and today we have answered that. So we have the formation of both radioactive and non-radioactive materials made in the same proportions and ratios that exist on Earth today. The radioactive elements form with both parent and daughter isotopes in the ratios we find them on Earth today. We have the lead paradox, which can only be solved by either accelerated nuclear decay or by the observations made by laboratory experiments, which shows how lead forms as it exists today, not billions of years ago. The new discovery of rocks from Earth's mantle make the lead paradox even worse than expected, and is again only solvable if you accept the results from these experiments, which end up falsifying deep time. This new data also solves other paradoxes as well, but this is all we have time for in this opening. If these elements formed just thousands of years ago in the exact ratio we see them today, as we have witnessed in the laboratory, then why assume they represent billions of years of decay? You can't. If they formed in ratios completely different than they are today, then sure, you would have a great case on your side that they have decayed over eons of time. But since we have observational, physical, repeatable, testable evidence to the contrary, Earth cannot be old. And this new evidence solves the paradoxes that exist in cosmology as well. So it seems to me that you can either accept the observational data that solves the evolutionary paradoxes or reject it, all because it confirms young Earth creation. I hope that you choose the logical and obvious scientific view in all of this. And that does it for me.